My name is Ben Hartley. I'm one of the neurosurge residents here. It's going to consist of kind of 4 mini sessions, about 30 minutes. A few little sessions we're doing. An overview of PrIMES, which a lot of you have already kind of seen in the intro session or the information session, so we'll kind of breeze through that. The framework and elements are kind of the nitty-gritty of the details of PrIMES. And then the last part is kind of what is PrIMES mentorship and what does it entail? Because it's a little bit different, actually a lot different than kind of a traditional mentoring relationship. A little bit more detail of the schedule, but we'll kind of go through these one by one tonight. So a quick overview, as you guys probably have already heard a bunch of times, our goal and our mission is to reduce the healthcare education diversity gap through our program, which pairs underrepresented minority college students with you guys, current residents and medical students who are interested in mentoring them. So the creation of PrIMES was inspired, from my perspective, by my experience with Teach for America, or with a lot of underserved populations. Also went to school at SUNY Downstate, so I got to treat a lot of people from underserved populations as well. And also just, as we all have had, experience working with other residents and medical students. So what we did, you guys have probably already heard some of this, so we'll make sure it's brief, but we started with some prelim data collection last July, where we interviewed and had focus groups with basically all the invested parties in the medical school admissions and application process. A comprehensive literature review of all the things that you would imagine. And then we designed our pilot curriculum. And so what kind of the crux of this data collection was that, we basically asked the AAMC, what do you need to do to get into medical school? And then we asked our prospective applicants, what are the barriers and challenges as an underrepresented student you have to reaching those milestones or those benchmarks that AAMC set out? And then overcoming those barriers and challenges is basically the point of our entire curriculum. Like, how do we get the students to do that? So that's kind of how we use the data to create the curriculum. We also designed some tracking tools, which I'll show you guys in a minute. And then we kind of designed the mentor training curriculum as well last year. We recruited and trained our mentors last November. Last year it was mostly, pretty much only, I think, medical students, and I think one MD PhD student that were serving as mentors. This year we opened it up to residents because after a lot of analyses of the program, we thought that would be best. And then we implemented last year. And we kicked it off, I think, at the end of, I think it was actually in February we kicked it off last year. And then throughout the whole program, we collected a huge amount of data, and that's what informed the modifications that led us to the second cycle of PrIMES, which is happening right now. And again, we're continuously analyzing our results to make the program better, make it, number one, easier for you guys, and more seamlessly integratable into your very busy schedules, and also more effective. And that's what we're doing now as we launch into our second year. So just graphically, this kind of shows like how it looked last year. And then into February is when we kicked it off. We're continuing into now in September, where we're just finishing the curriculum modifications. And now we're here. We're on the second cycle, and we're recruiting you guys. So thanks a lot for coming. There's another session tomorrow at Columbia with about as many Columbia residents as well. And then there's going to be a makeup session for the rest later. I think we have 65 mentors signed up this year. And that's extremely important because we can only take as many mentees as we have you guys sign up. So this year, I think there's 500 applicants that wanted to do PrIMES. And now that we have 65 of you, we can have 65 of them come into the program. So it's great. So the first step, what does the AAMC say, is an excellent medical school applicant? Back when probably a lot of us applied, it was, what are your grades? What are your MCAT scores? Did you volunteer? That's it. Now it's much more complicated. And they have this kind of very jargony definition of what they're looking for in the ideal medical school applicant. But really, what they're saying is that it's broad-based, it's linked to the mission and goals of the school itself, and it promotes diversity in every sense of the word as an essential element of their selection process. And basically, they have these things called experiences, attitudes, and metrics. And they use those to kind of define what they call a richly diverse applicant pool. And they can, with this, apply equity across the pool, or so they say. And then, they're grounding this data. And the reason they did this is because, you guys are all great. However, a lot of research shows that just looking at your grades and your test scores doesn't really make the best doctors for a variety of reasons. Oops. What does that look like? They didn't really they didn't really say what it is. Like a lot of people ask this question, what does that mean? What are these experiences, attitudes, and metrics? They didn't really say. They just gave us this really funny looking diagram. That's all they really gave. And they didn't really describe it too much further. But basically we can see that, the classic metrics of your GPA, your MCAT scores, your grades, kind of at the center here. But as you get out, they have kind of more nebulous things like your perspectives, your values and beliefs, the distance traveled, meaning kind of how far you've come in life to get to where you are. Even things like what world and cultural events you may have been involved in. And they didn't really describe exactly what that means, but through the years, people have kind of figured out what they meant by that and how that informs their selection of their incoming medical school classes. So what we did, we wanted to take a closer look at that for PrIMES. So we broke it down and we kind of listed it in a table form because it's easier to see. We saw that it's kind of these 3 things they mentioned. And we looked at these and we said, well, some of them are pretty straightforward. You can really tackle these with very tangible goals in mind. For example, their grades. You can get them to get their grades up. You can connect them to research experiences and community service. You can help them develop and display intellectual curiosity. These are all skills and experiences you can give to a mentee. However, the rest, a little more nebulous. How do you really coach or help a mentee or prospective med school applicant use their perspectives to help increase their chance of being in a med school? It's kind of complicated. And basically what we tried to do ultimately is quantify all of these things and kind of set them as goals that the mentees need to reach in order to be the best medical school applicant they can be. So what we did first is we had a series of focus groups where we surveyed, it's well over 150 actually, underrepresented medical school applicants, everywhere from high school age all the way past their post-baccalaureate years. And we asked them, what are the barriers and challenges to meeting those 36 AAMC defined factors? We had a huge amount of data, thousands and thousands of lines of responses. It was all professionally transcribed. And then we just had reams of paper of all of these responses on an individual level to those questions. And from that, we came up with 47 unique types of responses. And basically, we came up with these based on the unique keywords that students used after a series of analyses. And a lot of these are things that you kind of expect. But basically, these all amount to the barriers and challenges that our mentees are facing. Okay, and again, there's probably more than this, but we divided them into 47. And these do encompass all of the responses that they gave. And again, we applied the same kinds of analyses as we did to those 36 AAMC factors. For example, we looked at the modifiable factors. So again, things like lack of relevant experiences. We can give them the experiences they need. Now, their study skills. You can teach them how to study better, for example. These are the easy ones. They're modifiable or directly modifiable. The other set we saw were what we call surmountable. And those are things that, while not directly modifiable, they're things that they can overcome or frame in such a way that it can actually be beneficial to their application. So these are a little bit tricky sometimes and can require some workarounds. For example, a work requirement. So if not all, at least most of the mentees, they need to have a job basically the entire time they're in college. We can't directly modify that. We can't change their situation such that they can't do that anymore or that they don't need to do that anymore. However, for example, if your mentee works at, say, a Starbucks, a common job that a lot of college students might have, yes, that can display things like leadership and responsibility and things like that, but it's probably not the best option for them with regards to their medical school application. So one of our modules we have is called about relevant employment. So ideally, they could help them get a position in, say, a research lab or working in a hospital to get them the experience they need and things like that for their application. In the worst case scenario, even working at somewhere like the ABP in the hospital here downstairs, that can get them a hospital ID, and it also centralizes their work experience. So instead of having to commute across town, if they have a research position and a volunteer position here at Cornell, their job's here as well in that case. So that things like that can kind of surmount these things that could be a challenge. We can then use them to their advantage in their application. The last set of things, and we put quotes around this, we call it insurmountable. We put quotes because we don't want it to seem like if a mentee has one of these things or more that they can't apply to medical school. for example, a late start. So things like they're quote unquote insurmountable are things that are, for the most part, outside the scope of a mentorship program like PrIMES. So for example, if we have a potential mentee who's in their second post-bac year and they want to apply to medical school, next month, we don't really have the resources to give them what they need. That's not to say they can't successfully apply, but that's not really what PrIMES is all about. And so from these insurmountable barriers and challenges, from this is where our selection and exclusion criteria for the program are culled. We'll get into that more in a little bit. But for example, the late start. So because of this, almost all PrIMES mentees are either first or second year college students, because we found that the earlier you start, the more you can invest them in their future success. And again, ultimately, they'll be more successful for that. And so once we had those 47 different barriers identified, we did what's called a modified semantic content analysis, which basically just means we tabulated them all up. And then we found some pretty interesting trends. So for example, the number one most cited resource barrier type was financial or resource-based. Now, an interesting and important caveat to this is there's sort of an artifact in the way we collected our data, because in a focus group, you just ask the question and then you don't adulter their responses in any way. You just let them speak freely. They're free to ask questions, but you just transcribe the responses and that's it. So for example, we had one of the focus group questions was, the AAMC in medical schools want you to have research experience in a lab somewhere or something. And what barriers and challenges have you faced in reaching that goal? And a lot of the mentees might have said, well, those opportunities do not exist. That's not true. That just reflects a lack of knowledge of those or an unawareness of those, but that gets coded as a lack of resources, even though it's really just about their awareness of the resources. So that would actually then be more a part of the lack of knowledge or an external attitudes and factors barrier type, which is actually good. So this is kind of a little bit inflated here. The second most common cited barrier type was personal connections and experience. This is a great one because as a physician, you can actually give them those connections and experiences very easily. So long story short, the majority of the cited barriers and challenges are things that as a PrIMES mentor, you will be poised to give them relatively easily. We also found some pretty cool and interesting trends as we cut the data by what level they were in their education. So in blue here, we have the freshmen, sophomores. In orange, we have juniors and seniors as undergraduates. And then post-bacs are in gray. So for example, their academic skills. So the farther they get in their education, they cite that much less as a barrier to their success. Now, whether that's because they're gaining those skills or by the time they become a post-bac, those students have been weeded out who had a big problem with their academic skills, it's unclear from this. We do see similar trends in things like the lack of knowledge they have. Also, as they get farther along, we notice that they're noticing that personal connections and experiences are much more important when they're right before the process of application. So there's many, many more interesting trends we noticed that informed our curriculum design, but those are just a few of them. First mini session down on the second one. So that's how we design the curriculum. What do we do with all of that? So the first step in our recruitment process, we have a screening assessment. And next we have a family meeting, we do a pre-assessment. We then select the mentors and mentees and train them, and then we assign them to each other, and then we kick the program off. So I'm going to talk about these in a little bit of detail right now. So the screening assessment itself basically establishes our inclusion and exclusion criteria. It's kind of like a primary application. We had about 500 PrIMES applicants apply this year. And basically we're looking for first and second year college students within New York City. They have to have underrepresented minority status. They have to have a strong desire to apply to med school. And we also ask that they don't have more than 20 hours per week of non-negotiable family or other responsibilities. Actually, quite a few of our applicants, for example, have children of their own, and they have no access to childcare. So as soon as they get off of school or work or something, they have to go straight home and just take care of their kids. And again, it's not to say that someone like that wouldn't be able to successfully apply to medical school, but the requirements of participation in PrIMES as a mentee probably preclude students like this from being a member of PrIMES. So again, I forgot to mention that there are some questions I'm going to ask you guys during this presentation. They are kind of for your own knowledge, but also keep in mind that this is our second cycle only, and we're constantly trying to improve and modify the program. So anything you guys come up with, we can and will incorporate into the program, and you can have a lasting effect, on future generations of PrIMES mentors and mentees. So this is kind of the first one, and you'll see this little icon here. This is actually used in the PrIMES lessons as well, and it's kind of a little note that this is a time for self-reflection or for making connections to the rest of the PrIMES curriculum. So aside from these, are there any other potential exclusionary criteria you guys could think of? These are kind of the main ones. We kind of try to strike a balance. We try to strike a balance of accepting as many PrIMES mentees as we could, but not having some of the factors in their life make it difficult for them to participate. So the second step is a family meeting. This year, we're going to have it be a virtual family meeting because with all of the PrIMES mentees we had apply, it would be way too difficult to have all the families together at once. And also, families have varying levels of involvement in the mentees' lives at this point. But it is important to note that participation in PrIMES, in a lot of cases, will require sacrifices on the part of the family. Those need to be discussed, they need to be understood, and then the families often need to make a commitment to their mentee, especially at this age, because a lot of them are 18 and still live at home, that not only is the mentee committed to becoming a physician, but their family kind of needs to be committed as well. And the mentor facilitators and the leadership team participate in this for the most part. So speaking of the sacrifices, is there any sacrifices you think a family might need to make for their mentee to participate, even during the school year? We've had mentees bring their nephews and nieces to mentorship sessions a lot of times. It happens. It's very, very challenging, but we do ask that families make all the sacrifices they can if they're actually invested. And if the families kind of find out what is required, they say absolutely not. There's no way my child is not going to babysit their niece and nephew literally every day, all day. You can't force them. And if they are not able to make the mentor sessions and do the things they need to do, that can preclude them from participation. So the next step after we've kind of done the screening process, we then administer a pre-assessment. And this is extremely important, so I'll come back to this a little bit later. But basically, it's a comprehensive assessment that establishes a baseline of mastery for all the metrics that assess their readiness for the med school application. Again, these metrics are extremely important. These are kind of the backbone of the PrIMES curriculum. So I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. But kind of keep this pre-assessment in mind because that's what the mentees just finished taking now. And it is with this and a couple other things that we select the final cohort and then assign you guys your mentees, is using this pre-assessment. Then we select the mentees based on the screener, the family meeting, and also the pre-assessment I just mentioned. And then we group them based on that that short mentor survey you guys took, as well as their screening assessment and also the pre-assessment. There's some survey questions there that we gave them. And then finally, we're going to kick the program off. It'll happen probably a little mid to late September. It's going to depend on the final mentee-mentor matching process and the training and also everybody's schedules. But it'll happen later this month. It's a whole group session. We talk about the missions, the goals, the elements, what to expect. We talk about the service project, which I'll mention shortly. The mentees as well have a brief training. And then we'll pair you guys up and just there's going to be 120 people there. So you'll kind of meet up with your mentee, talk to them, exchange contact info, and just kind of hang out for a minute. And then that kind of is the start of the mentoring relationship. So the PrIMES program elements, these are kind of the cornerstones of PrIMES and kind of the tools that we use to kind of get realize our mission and reach our goals. So the backbone, I guess, of the mentoring flow is the mentor session. They're one-on-one sessions. They're about one per week, although it's going to be up to you guys. And they can be virtually or in person. Ideally, they'll be in person whenever possible, but we realize you guys are both very busy. It's more on the part of your mentee because For the in-person ones, we ask that the mentees come here because it exposes them to the hospital and the research environment and all that stuff. But a lot of them, live in one of the outer boroughs, things like that. So these can be pretty difficult. So we totally understand if, the majority end up being virtual, that's okay. But just keeping in mind that a one-on-one in-person session, whenever possible, actually is the most bang for your buck, and it really solidifies the mentoring relationship best. The day and time are kind of up to the discretion of you guys. You're all very busy, so we can leave it up to you to find a time that works best for you. The goal is to master 2 or more of what are called objectives in each session. The average, if you want to finish the curriculum within 7 or 8 months, is 2.2 on average. So basically you do like 2 each session, and then maybe one of your sessions in the month you do 3. And an objective is basically a skill or knowledge, experience, connection, a thing like that the mentee needs to have to maximize their competitiveness in their application process. After each session, you should create a schedule of some sort with your mentee about when they're going to master that objective. It can be informal, but especially in the beginning, it's very helpful if you remind them to kind of keep up with it. So for example, if the objective you're on is in the research unit and it's, if that particular objective is soliciting research sponsors to get a position in a lab somewhere. And one of the objectives is to send 3 emails to PIs that have been identified that are hiring for a research assistant or like a research volunteer, to send 3 of those emails. And so at the end of your, let's say you meet on Thursday, at the end of your session, you'll say, okay, they're going away this weekend. Monday they have a big test. So, okay, by Tuesday, does that work for you to send those emails out? They'll say yes. And then on Tuesday, if it's in the beginning of your relationship with them, send them a text or an email saying, hey, just to make sure you've done this, just to kind of keep on track. Ultimately, they should do all that stuff themselves because you want to empower them to kind of take ownership of their own, the reaching their own goals. But especially in the beginning, kind of reminding them a little bit really goes a long way, and also shows that you're invested. What do you guys think? Is there any disadvantages or advantages you can think of to like a very granular, objective-based approach like this? So this is pretty important. This is kind of the structure of the curriculum. So the objective is basically a thing that's designed to overcome one of those barriers or challenges that the mentee or the prospective applicants mentioned in the focus groups, okay? Sometimes they're kind of nebulous. For example, set goal setting, maybe an objective. Well, that's kind of, how do you master goal setting? It's kind of a nebulous concept. Well, each objective then has a few goals that are associated with it. And those are kind of the tangible items that are ostensibly achievable by the mentee through their participation in the program. And each goal then has one or more assessment items that are associated with it that measure the mastery of that goal. And that's kind of how we quantify all of these things. Again, it's kind of a big jump, especially with something super nebulous like, being a leader. Okay, well, how do you get a few goals that are tangible that show you're a leader? And then how do you assess those goals in a quantifiable way? It is a little challenging, but we did it. And these assessment items are scored with a rubric. And this rubric weights more favorable responses with respect to the application. So for example, if the question is about, their involvement in research, at the end of the day, we have to say, okay, how many projects have you been involved in outside of like your assignments for your chemistry class? And if they say 0, that's 0 points. If they say, up to 3 or more, that's 4 points. And everything in between is, those numbers. And again, do you have to have 3 or more research projects to be a successful medical school applicant? Not necessarily. But so the rubric is kind of seen more as a relative score. You don't need 100 in everything. You just need to be improving in order to become the best applicant that you can be, which is really what we're trying to do. We want to make them the best applicant to medical school that's possible for them. And these assessment items are what make up the pre-assessment, as well as the unit assessments. So basically what happens is all the mentees have already taken the pre-assessment. They've already taken every assessment item in PrIMES. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But we then reassess them with chunks of that that are basically units after they've completed the mentoring sessions about that objective. So it's kind of like a pre-assessment and a post-assessment to see how they've improved. So this is kind of what it looks like. All this stuff is going to be sent to you guys in a very detailed email that's got links and attachments and stuff. Most of it you won't really need to look at unless you're super interested. But they're all kind of tools that you can use to make it a little, make it a lot clearer to you. So for example, in unit 1, like the life skills unit, we have this objective here. Here's the objective title, again, kind of nebulous. Here are the 3 goals that are associated with it. And then here's that piece of the assessments and the rubric. And as you can see, it is a little bit arbitrary, the numbers we give, but of course, using 0 resources to get you into medical school is a lot worse than using over 3. So that's kind of the framework with which we designed this rubric. Rarely we have a few that have like one right and one right or wrong answer. For example, this lesson, the objective 1.9 lesson, has a brief piece on reliable internet sources. So it kind of tells them how to use the internet to do research or to identify things that'll help them reach their goals. You'd actually be shocked how many of the mentees, and these are 18, 19-year-olds that grew up with the internet, how many of them don't really understand, what is a reliable website. Actually, the majority of them didn't know what this was. So it just goes to show that, there's a huge amount that we can gain with our mentees with relatively little effort. So I'll show you guys what a lesson looks like. And so this is kind of the backbone of that resource. So this is the lesson that goes along with that objective I just showed you. So, it's got, usually they're between like 4 and 10-ish slides, but it starts with the goals and then it kind of divides it this way. Very importantly, when you look at these, sometimes just a picture like this, and it'll have these notes on the bottom that are for you and you only. Kind of like gives you some talking points about each slide. Sometimes they don't need any notes. A lot of times they'll have links, things like that. These are all fantastic resources. And then at the very end, they kind of will say, gives them a task. So for example, sometimes this is the goal for the end of the mentorship session, and they'll just do it right then and there. So you don't have to schedule anything. But this is just an example of one of the lessons. And there's one of these for every single one of the objectives. Ideally, you'll kind of use this as a kind of an adjunct to your relationship. But obviously, if you're super swamped and all you can do is just like take lessons right out of the box and use them, that's totally acceptable. And you'll definitely get gains just by doing that. But as you get farther along, you'll see that it does behoove you often to kind of tweak the lessons a little bit and make them your own. Going forward, just in some graphical or an infographic showing that the goal is 1 session per week. Again, if you want to have like, that PowerPoint should have taken maybe 15 or 20 minutes max. So if you meet for 1 hour, that's plenty of time to go through up to 3 or more objectives. So you don't even need to meet for that long necessarily. If you want to meet every other week, that's not as effective. But let's say for a while you're both really busy and you can only meet twice a month. You want to meet a little longer, that's totally fine. But on average, it should be about once per week to kind of get finished with the program in a timely fashion. And the goal being to master 2 more objectives per week. And then again, kind of an informal schedule, especially in the beginning, for mastering those objectives. And afterwards, you'll just have them complete the task. And you'll find out whether they've done that when they take their unit assessment, which happens maybe once a month, maybe a little bit less often than that. The other piece of PrIMES are the group sessions. These you're not necessarily as involved with these, but they're going to be held at Columbia, Cornell, Einstein, much less often, and very, very rarely somewhere else. They're usually workshops, lectures, activities, talks that are for the whole group of mentees. You guys don't need to come to them. Obviously, we would love to have you. There's food usually at them. But there are some objectives that are linked to those group sessions. So for example, one of the objectives is about their writing skills. You will have one very short session with them, one-on-one about that, but then they're going to have a whole writing workshop, later on, and that will improve their mastery of this objective because they're going to pick up all these skills and stuff from that group session. Just keeping in mind that there are a few things that you might not be involved in that will help increase their mastery as they go forward. The next piece is the service project. Again, it's I think I mentioned it in the info session if you guys saw, but it's a community service project. We're going to talk more about it at the kickoff meeting with everybody. And there will be a group session for designing and planning it, but basically it's kind of a cohort-wide project where the mentees kind of come up with something in their community, problem they can tackle, things like that. And then they kind of form their own project around it. Excuse me. There's no specific objectives that are tied to it, but again, participation in this can increase their mastery in certain of the objectives, as you'll see. For example, if you're in the community engagement unit of PrIMES, if they've already started their own community service project on their own via the service project, that's going to increase their mastery because they will report being more involved in that type of thing. The resources we have at our disposal, the PrIMES lessons, which I showed you, they include that PowerPoint deck. It's best to review it super briefly beforehand, even just like 30 seconds, just clicking through. If nothing else, just the notes at the bottom of each slide, just to kind of familiarize yourself with what is in them. And there's going to be a bunch of links, email addresses, videos, lists, things like that. Most of them will just be in the PowerPoint itself. And then you can kind of give them to the mentee through that. Again, as I said, ideally, you'll kind of use your creative license and enhance them to fit the mentoring relationship. But again, you do not have to do this. I know you're all super busy, and again, just straight out of the box, they've been kind of picked through very aggressively to make sure that they're as effective as possible. And if you see anything that you think should be changed, especially if it applies to everyone, please let us know. We're always trying to improve and make the program more effective and also easier on everyone involved. You're all super busy. For scheduling, again, once per week on average, you should ideally select a recurring time and day and location to make it easier on everybody, or easier on yourselves. Evenings and weekends, this room's available if you guys want. Also, there's like these outpatient clinic rooms just right over here that can work. There's computers in them. If you want to use those, that's fine. But just let us know and we'll help you schedule them. The medical school has a bunch of rooms too. If any of you guys went to school here, like the PBL rooms and stuff, we can help you schedule these or any other rooms if you need. If that's an issue, just please let us know and we will help you guys out. The group sessions, again, you guys don't have to go, but those dates are usually fixed because we have someone like flying down or something to give a talk. And the service project session, we will schedule that later on based on everyone's schedules. And this is probably the thing that is the most important, I would say, and makes PrIMES and our method the most unique. But it's the data tracking and the milestones. So the assessment engine we use is SurveyMonkey. I know you guys have seen it a million times, but it's kind of the most effective for what we need. And the unit assessments consist of a group of questions for each of those objectives that I showed you earlier. I will email you guys basically a little document that has a link, a SurveyMonkey link to each of the 6 unit assessments. Just keep it around, or if you lose it, you can just ask me for it again. And basically, at the end of the last objective of a unit, and you'll see on your little, on the list, you'll see that you've done the last objective. I think in Unit 1, there's 15 objectives. So after objective 1.15, at some point, soon after that, just email that link of the Unit 1 assessment to your mentee. It'd be extremely helpful if you can just remind them to do it. You won't know they've done it because that just goes directly to me and the PrIMES leadership team. But if you just kind of remind them once or twice or say, hey, can you please tell me that you've done this, like email or text me, that's really helpful for us because it makes it much easier to collect and analyze the data if everyone kind of completes the unit assessments and if there's not like a bunch of mentees who are straggling and haven't completed it. So once they complete the assessment, I know in the info session I said we were going to have you guys kind of do some of the data entry. We actually have made a lot of strides in kind of automating stuff, so you guys don't need to do that anymore. Basically, they're automatically graded for you, and then we enter them in the tracker. And then we'll email you guys and say, okay, and everyone, the Unit 1 assessment results are up. And then what you should do at that point, again, this takes like 20 seconds or 30 seconds, is go to the tracker. So this is the actual mentee data. I deleted the names, just replaced them with numbers here. But so far we have, I think, 46 mentees have completed it so far. There's a few that are still working on it. But what you'll see is that there's two of these actually. There's one that has the pre-assessment data, which is this, it's already done. And then there's going to be another one that's blank. And that's going to hold the unit assessments once they're done. So you'll have this link to this one, and then you'll also get a link to it's called the objective assessment tracker. And again, it's just a clone of this that's blank. After the first unit, you'll see it look just like this, but blank, and only this one is filled in. And what you should do once I send you the email is just kind of go and look here. Again, for privacy reasons, it's going to be a number there, and we'll just have emailed you your mentee's number and just kind of keep it around. Again, if you forget, just let us know, we'll tell you. But let's say your mentee's number 2 here. So, okay, this is the pre-assessment data. And there's a color coding scheme. So if it's below 70%, it's red, 70 to 80 is yellow, above 80 is green. It just kind of gives us a snapshot of kind of the overall performance of the cohort. And again, in the pre-assessment, you see it's mostly red. This is actually really good. This means that the mentees are all struggling. Mentees are struggling in the areas that PrIMES is specifically designed to help them with, which is great. So, okay, you have mentee 2. Her pre-assessment data was just below 60%. If you click here, this little plus sign, it expands, and these are all of the objectives for that unit, okay? So if this is your mentee, you look through and say, okay, you know, in objective 1.3a, you know, she got 83, excellent. You know, she did well on that, perfect. But then if you go over here, I don't know, to, okay, objective 1.8, composing and presenting a professional email, they got a 0.25 here. Now, importantly, you should go back and look at their pre-assessment tracker, which is this one. If they were a 0 coming in and now they're a 0.25, okay, they improved, great. But ideally, I think for this particular question, it was asking how similar is their email to like a professional boss or something? How similar is that to an email they would send to one of their friends? And obviously it should be different, but there's just like one example of a question there. So what you can do is, okay, next time you meet with the mentee, you can go over this with them. Actually, you should. And then ask them, okay, like, remember when we talked about being a leader, you know, it says here that, you know, you're still maybe a little uncomfortable with that concept and you want to talk a little bit about it. You can even go back and briefly review the PowerPoint and see what you actually covered that day. And there's a lot of things that could happen there. It could be the mentee just didn't take it to heart. Maybe the PowerPoint's not very good and you can help us improve it, or we need to improve it. Maybe there's something about the mentor-mentee relationship. You know, and we're still improving and modifying our assessment engine. So maybe the questions just aren't very good at assessing, you know, assessing mastery in that concept. We're doing the best that we can. We've already improved it a lot. But looking at these will be an important part of your relationship because it kind of circles back to the data and says, you know, what exactly have we been doing together and where have we done well? And, you know, what do we still need to work on to make you be the best applicant you can be and maximize your success? In the first cohort, you know, almost everyone was in the yellow and the green, so you probably won't have very many of these where you have to like go back and redo them. Pretty much, I think the vast majority of them made huge gains. I think the average was like 25% across the board. You know, we're poised, I think, to have even better gains this cycle. So again, it should be relatively rare. Most of you are going to look at the objective tracker and see that your mentee is just blowing it out of the water, which is excellent. And you know, it really helps to kind of go over this with them because the things they did great on, you can point it out and say, look, oh my gosh, like, you know, when you started out, you know, we're really struggling, and now look, you're a total stud, and you're, you know, ready to do these great things. So this can also be a good investment tool to kind of show your mentee how they're improving. But again, it's extremely important. You won't have to do any data entry. You just kind of look at it and kind of think about what that means about your relationship. Again, it's a very powerful tool, and it really helps us see where you know, where the mentees need the most work. So what that basically is called is targeting. So once you kind of go through and look at those objectives, as like kind of what I just, you know, showed you guys was what that's called. Kind of target the need areas that they have based on and where they need the most work. And again, one thing I should have mentioned is that I'm going to send you guys a link to the pre-assessment tracker before you even start a meeting with your mentee. You should go through that and look. And, if your mentee already, is in 3 research labs and is like literally published in Nature or something, I doubt it, but it's possible. You can kind of skip over some of the research stuff with them, right? Whereas if they've never set foot in a hospital and they've never met a doctor in their life, in the clinical exposure section, you probably need to hit that a little harder. So the targeting really applies before you even start, because every mentee is different. And we do have some mentees that are actually really, really involved in research. I've done some great things, at a very early stage in their education, for example. So things like that you can kind of gloss over a little bit, or just make sure that you're a resource for them if they need you. But they will have strengths and weaknesses. And that the pre-assessment tracker is going to help you target what you do, okay? And you should try to at least peek at that before you meet with them, because it will, again, if you're kind of preaching to the choir about something, it helps to know that ahead of time. And again, literally it'll just take you a couple minutes. You only have to do it once a month, because those unit assessments come out probably every 5 weeks. But then you'll have all that data to look at. If you need any assistance or questions, if something doesn't seem right, or there's any even suggestions, please let us know. Again, you guys are all extremely smart people, and we love to have your input about this stuff. Lastly, the mentee goals checklist. It's basically just a list of all the objectives. If you want to have it be virtual, or you want to have your own or something, that's fine. But it really can help kind of invest the mentee in getting everything done. And it kind of helps them with organization, with making lists and keeping track of things like that. Excuse me. And it can really be helpful and kind of in helping invest them. So that's kind of the end of the nitty-gritty details of what the program entails and kind of the day-to-day, how the data works. This last piece is basically about, what is a PrIMES mentor? And as you can see, it's a little different than maybe a traditional mentor, at least maybe how you may have experienced one before. I'm going to talk about the pieces of the mentoring puzzle that we pulled together to make what is the PrIMES mentor. So I guess to start out, what do you guys know about mentoring, at least in your own experience? Like anything you think of that makes a good mentor? This is all from, kind of the gurus of mentoring. Kang and Hines are 2 big ones. They've been writing about this stuff for decades. But so they have kind of the guide to mentoring and what the, not the mentoring competencies, because that's something else, but these are kind of the attributes of a successful mentor, and they're arranged in a few different families. So the first is knowledge. So the knowledge of your mentee. Where do they come from? What do they want to do? Things like that. And you'll kind of get that through just meeting with them and stuff. Okay, you have specialized knowledge because you've done all this before. You're a physician or a medical student at least, and you kind of know what needs to be done to get to the position you're in. You also have personal knowledge, things you've gone through that can inform and enhance your relationship and the way you're educating the mentee. You have some personal skills, kind of some of the things related to what you guys said about communication, listening, you're motivating, you have a position to influence your mentee because of a variety of reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. Fact-finding is important. Most of these facts are kind of given to you in the PowerPoint presentations, but the other ones you just kind of already know. They'll ask you, oh, should I do this or that if I want to apply to med school? You'll kind of already know because you've done it. Liaising. This is a big one as a PrIMES mentor because you're sort of in this world. So anyone you can introduce them to or connect them with is a very important part of the liaising piece. Development, obviously, you're developing your mentor, or your mentee to become the best applicant they can. Time management, as a resident, I'm sure you guys are experts in this, but you're also mirroring that to the mentee and teaching them these things. Counseling is very important. This is going to be really challenging. And these mentees, for the most part, are going through a lot of things that are kind of outside the scope, of what's common or normal for most medical school applicants. And it's extremely challenging. In some cases, you're going to be telling them to do even more stuff. And so being there and kind of that, support system and support network for them is going to be really important, especially because they're probably not getting it anywhere else. You guys would be shocked if you heard some of the things that pre-med advisors have told them about, like, not to apply, people like you aren't doctors, like horrible things. And you might be the only person in their life that's really there to kind of support them and tell them, be encouraging to them. Some qualities, which kind of go along with the personal skills, but your ability to open doors. Along the lines of liaising, you're here to, you're in this world. So you're able to open a lot of doors for them. Your willingness. You guys have put up with all of my annoying emails and all this stuff. You're here on like a work day at like 8 o'clock at night. So it seems like you're all willing, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. It kind of goes on with commitment as well. You guys all seem like you're committed. I promise it's very front loaded. After this, the training and all that stuff, it kind of runs itself a little bit. You just got to meet with them once a month, or once a week rather, and then just kind of peek at the data, once a month at most. Enthusiasm is pretty important too. It kind of goes along with the counseling. Being enthusiastic and them reaching their goals. A lot of times, everyone's kind of negative around them. People kind of discourage them, or at least have nothing to say about it. So you, again, might be the only person in their life who's enthusiastic about, them working to reach their goals. And again, had a long day in the OR or something, or on the wards, it's going to be tough to appear enthusiastic, in an evening or something, but just a little goes a long way, and just please do your best, because this really means so much to the mentees. Confidentiality. Eventually, you're going to know these students for, by the end of the program, 8 months, and they're going to start to tell you things that you should keep in confidence. There's a few caveats to this, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, being their confidant and keeping things confidential that they want you to is also important. And also your experience. This one's kind of a little bit more obvious, but you had personal experiences that make you who you are and got you to where you are. Also educational experiences. You've gone through what they're going through now educationally, and everything thereafter. And you're still kind of a lifelong learner, as a physician. So you can model that for them as well. And your professional experiences as well. So as a physician, you've done all the right things that got you here, and your day-to-day life is what they want. So that's extremely important in your mentoring relationship. The next piece that Peg and a few other people talked about this is called mentor credibility. So yes, you can mentor someone, but why will they care what you have to say? Why would they listen to you? So what Peg said establishes and defines mentor credibility are your age. So these students are probably between the ages of 18 and 20, almost exclusively. I hope most of you are older than that. So that just your age alone will lend you some credibility, because you're, hopefully at least somewhat older than they are. You complete a lot of projects. This doesn't just mean research and kind of community service projects, but basically everything you've done since your freshman year in college to now counts as a project you completed that gives you that credibility with them. Your knowledge, pretty much every question they're going to ask, you'll have an answer to, as far as your application goes. Your success, you have reached their ultimate goal. So that's something that is very important. And just that in and of itself, they're going to listen to basically everything you have to say. Along with that comes experiential wisdom. Maybe not all of the things, maybe not all the interpersonal things they've gone through, you will have done so as well, but you've jumped through all the hoops that they have, or that they are needing to jump through. So that helps quite a bit. Your appearance, this one's a little contentious, especially as a resident. Especially when I was on service, I was looking pretty scruffy, but if you need to show up in scrubs to your session, that's okay. It's kind of like the uniform of the physician. But this appearance piece is very important for the mentees, because I guess an unfortunate way of putting it is that you've kind of like earned the right to be that. And for the mentees, they need to understand that, code switching is a big part of it, because, when they're in OChem, let's say, and like in their OChem lecture, that's sort of them being on the wards. Whereas when you go to clinic or something, or when you're giving a presentation, you don't necessarily wear your scrubs or something. You kind of have to dress up or whatever, and, comb your hair or something. So The appearance piece is big, but they need to, it's kind of, it can be a learning piece because they need to understand that at certain times, more often for them than for you, they really have to take a lot of stock in their appearance. Your presence is important. They're going to be paying a lot of attention to what you say. You may be the first doctor they've ever met, at least outside of, their pediatrician or something. And so they're going to be hanging on very subtle things like your body language, things like that. If you're showing confidence, if you're showing not only confidence in yourself, but also in them as a prospective applicant, if you're showing that you're invested in what's going on, little things like that can really go a long way in them trusting you. Your expertise kind of goes along with your experiential wisdom, but you are an expert medical school applicant because you all did it successfully. A truth teller. This is also extremely important. They're going to be encountering a lot of people that kind of just tell them what they want to hear or what they don't want to hear, and it's not true. So if your mentee is struggling with something or they're, consistently showing behaviors that will prevent them from being a successful applicant, you need to tell them. And it's kind of hard, especially in the beginning. It's a little awkward. It's like, I don't know this person, but I'm basically kind of, from the very beginning, telling them some potentially hard truths. That's what they need. You're only really with them for 8 months on this one-on-one basis. You can totally continue relationship afterwards, and we'll talk about that later. But, what you tell them during those 8 months is going to stick with them forever and really will directly impact their success and their future. So that's extremely important. And lastly is the chemistry of the relationship. This is kind of the last, advanced level credibility building piece, but that'll sort of develop through time as you get to know them. And speaking with some of the other mentors, they definitely developed a strong chemistry with the mentees. It just kind of comes from the relationship, and you'll get there for sure. The next piece is about the competencies. These are kind of not really what gives you credibility, but these are the things that you should try to embody as a mentor. And if you do all of them, they all contribute to what's called mentoring excellence. Excuse me. It's kind of like that weird AAMC document that shows what the excellent med school applicant is. First is self-awareness. So you should assess the relationship, your own impact, and then build the best relationship possible. And you also want to mirror that self-awareness to your mentee. So a lot of them might have behaviors that will hinder them in the future, and they might not even realize it. So not only should you be self-aware for the relationship, but also to teach them by example. Communication, you guys said earlier, very important competency. You're going to be talking to them a lot, kind of like I am now. But a lot of times when they're actually talking to you, you listening, paying attention is extremely important, and they will value that. Also, kind of proportion, extensive proportion, and good humor. Little really goes a long way in building the rapport. Seeing things in a different way, and just kind of keeping the process enjoyable. I mean, if humor is not your thing, that's totally fine. But really, it's kind of a lot of heavy stuff. And it's very stressful for the mentees. You're telling them they have to do all these things, and if they don't, it's going to minimize their chances of getting in and all this stuff. And it's a dream for them. So a little bit of this type of stuff can really make it, it's kind of icing on the cake to building that chemistry we talked about earlier. Your interest in developing others. Based on what I've talked to you guys about already, in the recruiting process, it sounds like all of you guys are here for that reason, which is great. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. But having a passion for seeing others grow, and also a passion in the message specifically of the program, which in this case is PrIMES, is extremely important in being a successful mentor. Relationship management probably could be its own competency, its own separate competency by itself, but Clarabot put it together with, as a piece of the mentoring excellence. But really the ultimate goal of this relationship management is to create that rapport. When they're going to trust you, they're going to do, whatever they think that you guys agree would be, the best to get them to their goals. So this encompasses a lot of things. For example, trust. And will you do what you say? If you say, I'm going to email you about this, do you actually do that? Will you keep what they tell you in confidence if you can? Another piece for this is focus. So you're going to be super busy, obviously, but for that 1 hour or so of the week, are you focusing on them? They have a lot of people overlooking them and things like that, and have really, especially academically, have people really just kind of looking the other way and not focusing on them. And having you as a physician and their mentor focusing on them 100% will be, I cannot tell you how much it means to them. Also, their empathy. Your empathy. I know we learned a lot about it in med school, and it's kind of drilled into us as residents and whatnot. But are you listening to the mentee without judging them? They're going to tell you all kinds of things that you may or may not agree with, but it has to be a safe space. You have goodwill towards them. You have their best interests in mind, because they may think that here and there, but even like their pre-med advisor maybe doesn't. Maybe they have a quota or something. Maybe if they pre-medically advise a student that they don't get in, maybe they get some professional consequence. So really, maybe you might be the only person that has their best interest in mind is with regards to this goal of theirs. It's extremely important that not only do you have that, but you show it. Also, congruence with what they need. Do you understand their viewpoints, or do you do your best to? Maybe you can understand it from firsthand experience, but do your best to acknowledge and accept them. And lastly, empowerment is the last kind of piece of the relationship management aspect. The goal of the empowerment piece is to aim to help the mentee become as independent as soon as is practical. In the beginning, you're kind of holding their hand a little bit, but it's sort of kind of like this gradual release of responsibility, kind of like between a junior and a senior resident. Your chief's not doing everything for you, and then day one of your second year, they're like, oh, they're kind of slowly backing away, and kind of you hit the ground running, and then before you know it, you're doing it on your own, and they're kind of like not even there anymore. That's kind of the goal of this type of relationship. You're empowering them to do it themselves. Because if you have a freshman in college, some of the mentees actually are not even in college yet. They're just starting their freshman year. The second they finish with you, they're going to be starting like their second year, and they're doing OChem and stuff. And they're going to, if they're not empowered to be proactive and independent, kind of can fall apart as soon as you're not there all the time. So the next piece is the goal clarity. Having the ability to be clear and inspiring in the goals that you set with them. Again, with PrIMES as a structured mentorship program, the goals are kind of already laid out, but ideally, together you guys have this big goal of being a successful applicant, and little pieces and the nitty-gritty granular details, we kind of help fill that in, but investing them in those goals is really important. Next is the behavioral awareness. So when you meet your mentee in the very beginning, you kind of pick up on some behaviors. And for example, if they're constantly 10 minutes late to all of your sessions, or they're constantly, forgetting to do like little things about, in the mentorship relationship, being aware of behaviors like that and predicting how they'll affect both your mentoring with them and also their future success are super important. Because little things like that might not be super apparent at first, but helping them nip those behaviors in the bud is going to be very important, because being meticulous, detail-oriented, organized, even if they're not good at that type of thing, which many people aren't, at least being able to, fake it or, work on those things to improve their performance will be key. Commitment to your own learning, mostly about the mentee, but basically, the mentor, you're sort of a role model, and if you're sort of invested in learning about them, they're going to kind of in turn be invested about learning about the process and what they need to do. That's extremely important. Next, conceptual modeling. Again, the kind of PowerPoints and the lessons do a lot of this for you, but there are some kind of nebulous concepts that are sort of intangible, and you have to help them model those. And again, you guys have already been there, you've done it, so you should be able to relatively easily make these a little bit more within their grasp. And lastly, professional savvy. We sort of already talked about this, but you use your experience and judgment to guide the mentees to being the best applicant they can be. And again, the farther you get, it's kind of more individualized, and you'll kind of figure it out as you go. But it'll become easier to use this to meet their needs. So that's all about the mentors and all the million things you guys should be to be a mentor. But in your mentee, what kind of things would you look for, like ideally, for the perfect mentee? Their openness, that's a huge one. They definitely are going to have that for sure. Commitment as well. That can be an issue sometimes, and that's where the glue of your relationship and the chemistry and all that stuff really helps keep them invested. And The room to grow, that's actually a big one, because our last exclusion criteria I didn't really mention was that, of the mentees that took that pre-assessment, the first ones that we exclude are the ones with the highest scores, actually, which is pretty unique among mentorship programs. As you may have heard, like, most of these are extremely competitive, and they only take, applicants that are like 4.0 and all this stuff, and like it's merit-based. When really, why are you doing that for students that are already statistically going to get in anyway? Med schools are trying to build their diversity. So if they see an applicant who's already an absolute all-star, they don't need a program like this. So we actually always clip off the top performers because they don't need us. And the very, very lowest performers that don't even complete the survey, we also kind of, we can't even work with that because they're not even giving us the information we need. But the sweet spot is students that are really honestly trying, but they're just not getting there. And that's where you guys come in, because they have a huge potential to grow, as you said. And I guess this is a much more complicated question. You have this perfect mentee in your mind. So they want to grow, and they're also pretty young. So focus on kind of molding them into the right mentee for you, because then you'll get the most bang for your buck, and they're going to learn the most and grow the most from your relationship. So we're going to kind of briefly gloss through this, but basically another model of mentoring is called developmental mentorship model. And basically it's the mentor is kind of a helper, and they kind of take someone with less experience than them and kind of gain confidence and purpose and insight and wisdom. And importantly, the mentor also is changed by the relationship. Sponsorship is slightly different. This is more of an advocating relationship, sort of like within a business of some sort, like a manager and kind of an underling, where you kind of groom them to and invest yourself in their success. So really, you're kind of doing both of these things. You are a mentor, but also classically a sponsor. And that's an important distinction, because, in traditional mentoring, you can mentor anyone that wants to be, a football player or something, or a race car driver. It doesn't matter. Just mentoring them, just kind of being an advocate for them in general is easy. But you're also a sponsor for them, because you're not necessarily going to call an admissions department for them, but you're in a position to, groom them to be, the next generation of physicians, which is important. Speaking of the developmental model, I really appreciate you guys all being here and making the commitment, but what are some things that you guys hope to gain from this? But you're definitely going to grow in ways that you probably didn't really realize. And you're going to learn some things and experience some things that will really, they'll change you. And in a lot of programs like this, and Teach America being one of them, this is kind of, you use a lot of the same, if you've ever heard of Teach America, because it uses a lot of the same principles from that. Also things like the Peace Corps, things like that. Yes, you go into it to change, the target of the program. But in a lot of cases, you're actually even changed more than the person you're trying to help yourself. So just keep that in mind, that, it's definitely something that can can change you in positive ways going forward. So really quickly about what makes successful mentoring programs. Kind of informal mentoring might be what you're most familiar with, kind of just like the big brother, big sister, you meet somebody and then help them out. There's no objectives that it's tied to. There's no specific goals or metrics. They don't really track any data of any type. They just kind of generally match the mentors, mentees by either nothing randomly, or just kind of similarity or attraction. There's no managers. There's no defined timeline or anything like that. Formal mentoring, though, has these things. It is tied to objectives. It does have metrics. There are developmental goals in mind that inform the matching of the mentors and the mentees. there's usually a managerial structure, and there's a defined timeline of some sort. So as you go, from left to right, they become from less to more strategic. And this for PrIMES is what we really thought was most important because, we have a very tangible and data-based goal that they're trying to reach. These med schools, they turn everything to numbers. They have thousands of applicants. They need to say, okay, I'm going to divide these applicants up by the number of hours they've spent. I mean, if you guys remember, they do ask you that. It's like, how many hours did you spend on all these projects? And they rank people based on that. So if they're looking at it numbers based, we felt that we can't really do an informal model. We need to tackle it from the numbers too, and sort of hack their admissions process, if you will, with our own data-driven approach. So kind of one of the last pieces about what is the PrIMES mentor aspect. There's classically thought to be 4 stages of a mentoring relationship: beginning, building, testing, and transition. You may or may not experience all of these, but it's just kind of like what to expect. So in the beginning, there's always awkwardness. You get to know each other. You're kind of exploring your similar interests. Some of this is done for you by that mentor survey you guys filled out and the mentees, assessments they've taken. But you're finding common ground, discussing expectations. You're going to set the parameters of when you'll meet and what the activities you'll have, etc. So there's some pitfalls, and these have been well documented in the mentoring literature. But I want you guys to think about how you can use these, because these totally will and they have come up. A lot of these are also taken from what happened last year. Again, that said, we had a very successful cohort last year, and everyone made very significant gains, but it wasn't without hiccups and pitfalls. So for each one of these, just kind of think about how you can use them as learning opportunities or avoid them. So in the very beginning, you're probably making all the decisions. They're going to say, hey, what do I do? And then you just tell them, and that's it. Again, with the empowerment model, we want to shy away from that eventually, but something to think about. So how do you think you could maybe avoid this? Sharing the decision-making and also modeling it, because making decisions is something they're going to have to do all the time, and empowering them to make their own decisions, leading by example, that can really pay dividends all the way down. And this is something that we do a lot of spiraling in PrIMES, where you have foundational skills in the beginning, like being a leader and being, persevering and things like that. And then later on, when they're doing more specific stuff like research or whatever, you're spiraling that, and it's like, oh, hey, there's a little piece in one of the PowerPoints, like, oh, remember, 2 months ago when you learned about perseverance, here's where you should be bringing that back in and really hitting that home. So, empowering them to be making decisions is very important. Missing meetings is something that definitely will happen. Everyone's busy, but you'll have, a phone meeting or like a Skype meeting rather, and then they're not there, or they don't do it. That's something that it'll definitely happen to all of you, I promise. What do you think? So one thing we found is kind of use it as a learning tool as far as responsibilities and like forming priorities and being organized, because yes, this is probably with little or no consequence ultimately for them. However, what if they're doing this? What if they have like a Skype interview with a potential employer or a potential, research sponsor or something like that? From your perspective, yeah, this doesn't matter as much, but from them, they don't necessarily see it like that. This is a big deal to them. They're meeting with probably the only physician they've ever met before outside of their own personal physician, and they just missed a meeting. So if they're doing that, you have to assume they're going to miss other things as well. So really using that as, an example of something that they should never do. And, a lot of like communication. If they can't make it, they need to tell you ahead of time, for example, or reschedule it. This one's more for the mentors, really. They might do these things, and it might be easy to misinterpret it. Maybe they don't care, or maybe they're not actually invested in going to medical school. So again, they're going to be struggling, and a lot of the mentees are kind of in over their heads. About half of them are sophomores. They're just starting to take OChem and physics at the same time, and they're now kind of realizing that they should be volunteering and doing research at the same time. They're freaking out, and their parents are like, "Why aren't you coming home to watch the niece and nephew? Like, what are you doing?" So it's going to be a lot of stress. Being cognizant of what they're going through and talking to them about it helps you kind of frame this. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't use it as a learning opportunity, but just do your best not to take it personally. And expecting too much too soon, that always happens. You're going to see, this curriculum we developed and all this stuff, but then in the very beginning, when you're meeting them, they are woefully underprepared for the eventual med school process, and they're even underprepared for being as a successful pre-medical student, which is important. So realizing that you're reaching them at ground zero, which is the ideal PrIMES mentee, and you just like baby steps in the beginning, and then they'll take off pretty quickly once you kind of get the hang of everything. One thing you should think about, and this probably isn't the case most often, but if they're missing a lot of meetings or you think they're not invested, maybe they're feeling like it's not worth their time. And that is one of the number one goals of PrIMES, is to be as effective and efficient as possible, because we don't want to make more work for the mentors or the mentees, because that's kind of just defeats the whole purpose of PrIMES. And also, we can't get you guys to do this if it's a huge pain in the ass for you guys, and the same with them. I mean, they'll do it anyway because they're really invested and they kind of feel like they have to do as much as they can. But, something, if you're seeing one of the PowerPoint lessons or, some part of PrIMES and you're like, wow, this is kind of superfluous and isn't necessary, like, let us know. We're not taking offense. If you guys think it's like too much work and there's parts of it that are just not useful, let us know, and then we will cut it out. And we will do what we can to streamline everything for you guys. In the building phase, after you've kind of gotten through the first awkwardness, you're gonna learn more about each other. They start opening up. You're sharing the information with each other that builds trust. Feel free to share stuff about yourself. Actually, that's quite an important part of the mentoring relationship, because they're gonna want to get to know you and know that you're human too. And once they see that, oh, okay, like I can kind of see their pathway, and they can kind of envision themselves doing the same thing, that's going to be so important for them. Because they may not have actually ever met a resident, even if they have shadowed a doctor before. And they might not even really know what a resident is necessarily. So letting them figure that out and like showing them firsthand is going to be very important. Routines are going to be very important. Not only to just make it easier for you guys to do your thing, but also routines are just important. It'll help them kind of organize their lives, and having a study routine, a research routine or whatever, those are going to be very important for them. And also empower them to plan for setting the goals on their own, because you're going to lay it all out for them over the 8 months, but afterwards they're going to have new goals and they're going to be totally by themselves, and they're going to need to do it themselves. So they may start to become the dependent. In the beginning, this is normal. However, when you're kind of in the building phase and you want them to not do this anymore, you really have to set boundaries and use this as an opportunity to teach motivation and independence. And remind them that you're not going to be there forever. And that's cool. You can be available to them, but ultimately you want to empower them to do it on their own. And you might get overwhelmed a little bit by what they're going through. And we had this last year as well. You're getting a mentee who possibly has a lot going on in their life. And it might seem that we might not call it in PrIMES insurmountable things, but you might get this whole package and say, oh my gosh, like this is not something, I don't think they're going to be successful, or, this is overwhelming to me just to hear about all this stuff. You can reach out to us if there's anything that you're uncomfortable with. You'll have the emails and contact of all the PrIMES leadership team. Also talking to each other about it. Even other mentors from last year or just other mentors in the program now are definitely going through the same things. And so talking about it amongst yourselves can be really helpful. And talking about it often helps, and just, sharing the things you've gone through, obviously while maintaining confidentiality, can be very helpful. And, I feel underappreciated. This is something that often in mentorship is a big issue, but in our particular brand of mentoring doesn't really happen. They're always extremely thankful of your sacrifice and your time. And especially as a resident, they'll realize like, oh my gosh, this doctor is taking this time out of their day. And they're so busy. It really means so much to them. So this is much less of an issue. Testing phase, this is more in younger people, our mentees, some of them are like 18, so they might kind of go through this, but for the most part, this is the testing part's usually in, it's more well documented in with like adults mentoring like children. But again, it is something you might go through. They might feel less motivated to meet the goals. And, it might be easy to take the shift in their behavior personally. And there's no, right answer for the testing phase. It's just kind of a difficult growing pain you have to go through. But at this point, you should really have some strategies for reinvesting them and kind of getting their motivation that are going to be unique to your relationship with them. So if you talked about kind of, what their personal goals are and all this stuff, that can really help at this stage when the testing is kind of the toughest part of the mentoring relationship. And then the transition phase, this is at the end. We're kind of going through this now, or have been going through it with the first cycle. You might feel not all the goals are met. Maybe not all their objectives have gotten to perfect mastery. Maybe they're still in the red here and there on a few things. You might feel like there's some loose ends. That's totally okay. It is something that, it may feel like there's an abrupt end to the relationship. You might feel like there's no concrete plan for their success in the future. And they may want to continue the relationship outside the scope of the completion. This is totally okay. It's encouraged. They're going to see how busy you are, and they're going to know that they're not having weekly mentorship sessions, most likely. We do have an alumni mentee network. So we send them a newsletter once a month that has all the details they need. It even has like some personalization. So at the end of your guys' sessions, wherever they're weakest, we kind of help invest them in developing those things on their own. So, and occasionally you might want to, let them check in with you every now and again and let you know how they're doing. That's totally fine and is actually encouraged. And one thing you guys need to keep in mind is that all of the data shows that most of the benefit of a mentoring program, especially one like this, doesn't really manifest itself until way down the line. Even their ultimate goal of becoming a medical student and a physician, if your mentor is a freshman, they're not going to do that for like 3 years. You might not even hear from them again at that point. That's totally okay. And you need to realize that you are doing good work, even if they don't end up applying to med school, which happens. The things that you're going to be giving them and showing them will pay dividends no matter what they do. It doesn't matter. Teaching them how to keep a schedule, how to use the internet appropriately, how to send a professional email. These are things that'll help them no matter what. So regardless of what happens to your mentee, you're doing good work, and it's very important. So kind of the take home from this is that you're going to be a part mentor, part sponsor, and also part teacher in a few ways. And kind of the very, very last piece of today's training is this model of mentoring as leadership. More so than other types of mentees, they really have to do a lot. They have to just be a total badass, especially coming from some of the circumstances they are. They need to do that to become what they want to be. And so you're kind of leading them to do that and leading as a model. And so there's 6 key principles to this. Some of them are kind of, you'll make your own based on your relationship with your mentee. But the first is set ambitious goals for achievement. So they say, okay, I want to be a doctor. What does that mean? So you're going to show them what they have to do and help them set goals. You're going to invest the students and families in working hard to achieve those goals. Families less so, we kind of handle that part. But the students, or in your case, the mentees, you need to invest them continuously. And again, that investment strategy depends on who they are and who you are. You plan purposely to achieve the vision of success for them, whatever that means to them. And you execute that plan with judgment, your best judgment as a mentor and as a physician, and also making slight adjustments based on the data and also your relationship with them. Continuously increasing your effectiveness to accelerate their achievement. Mostly that'll come from the data and just kind of using your acumen based on the relationship. We try to make this part as easy for you guys as possible. As a teacher, they're staying up late every night and getting up early in the morning to write better lessons and stuff. You guys don't have to do all that stuff. It more just is about cognizance, embodying, what it means to be a good PrIMES mentor, and then keeping in mind, what your data shows and what the mentee's data shows. And working relentlessly, again, to navigate the challenges. Really, it's about just not giving up. It's going to be tough sometimes. Probably the biggest work you'll have to do is just bothering them a lot about keeping in touch and like keeping their mentoring meetings. It's just going to be sending emails and text messages mostly. But if it's ever becoming too much or you're having to do it frequently, you please let us know. At the very, very end here, in a minute, we're going to talk about some challenges that will come up. Like when to reach out. But again, just kind of being perseverant almost in getting your mentee to do what they need to do. And so when you're setting ambitious goals, they need to be measurable. We kind of handle that for you guys with in the quantification of those objectives. You need to be ambitious, which they're going to be based on your mentee's data. So they're here now. They need to get much higher than that based on reaching those goals. And you're going to develop them together. So yes, the PowerPoint has the goals in it, but it kind of helps sometimes to say, okay, based on the previous lesson, med schools want you to do research. So what do you think that means you need to do? And then hopefully you come up together, well, I should probably get involved with some research. Okay, well, how about we say, you aim to be working in a research lab at least, an hour a week or something like that by next month or next week or something. So even though that's, what the goal is going to be ultimately, helping lead them there is extremely important. And you use strategies for investment, even little things. If you guys share the same taste in music or something, even silly little things like that, to kind of chat about them and just kind of bond with them, even things like that you might not think, they can really help invest them in those goals. Investing them, so the mentees you'll meet with, families, again, you're not going to have to meet with them. We will do that for you. But if you ever feel the need to meet with a family or the mentee is asking you to meet with the family for some reason, let's say you're telling them, based on this goal to do one thing and the family is saying that they don't want you to do that, please involve us immediately. You can totally be involved in the family meeting if you want to, but it's definitely not required. And the program managers are myself and a few other people, but you'll have all those details given to you. And again, there will be low expectations, unfortunately, that have been fed to them, not even by themselves, by like the world around them. And reversing those are extremely important. And that's a big part of PrIMES, especially early on, teaching them that intelligence is not fixed, their achievement is not fixed, and if they work hard, they can accomplish any of these things that it's within their grasp. Again, as I just said, changing the belief that those things are fixed is important. And again, if they work hard enough, they will become a competitive applicant, but it does take hard work. There's something called backwards planning. Have you guys ever heard of this? It's
alignment and backward design are instructional strategies paramount for successful course design. An alignment is a condition in which all the counterparts within a group or relationship work together. Think of gears that turn together to cause the minute hand to move on a clock. All the pieces must interlock in order for the clock to keep time. In course design, there are 5 counterparts that must be aligned to ensure a student's success. They are learning objectives, assessments, instructional activities, resources, and course technology. The way these 5 counterparts work together is referred to as alignment.
So this is sort of mirrored in the PrIMES. Basically, there's the objectives we talked about, the assessments, the resources and activities are kind of the lessons you guys do, and the technologies are just the way that you deliver those. So this is about teaching specifically, but this is the part of a PrIMES mentor that's really a teacher as well.
Need to learn rather than what we want to teach. If you start at the end goal, meaning you start with what students should know and work backward, you are assured that your students finish your course with an understanding of what is most important for them to learn. Once course objectives are established, you must next decide on how you want to assess the student's ability to successfully complete the objective. In order for the objective and the assessment to be aligned, they must work together. For instance, if the objective is for the learner to be able to demonstrate the ability to make a flaky pie crust, but the assessment is a multiple choice test, the objective is not aligned with the assessment. Again, working backwards, the third counterpart of an alignment map is the instructional activities that prepare the student to achieve success on the assessment. Using our pie crust example, aligned activities would be for students to weigh ingredients, roll pie dough, etc. Because it would not prepare the student to achieve the assessment, a misaligned activity for this particular objective would be to read an article on the history of pies. Still working backwards, the fourth step in our backwards alignment map is to provide resources that will help the student do the instructional activities. For instance, in order for a student to make a flaky crust, you may assign text to read and pie crust demonstrations to watch to prepare them to successfully complete the activity. Lastly, if you use technology in your course, it must also align. Using our pie crust example, technology such as a word processing program requiring a student to write a paper would not align with this particular objective, but a video demonstration of the student making the pie would. Now you have it. Backwards design and alignment, working together for quality.
How we did this in PrIMES is we started with those objectives. So basically AMC told us that. They said, here's what they need to do to successfully apply to med school. And then we cross-reference that with their barriers and challenges, as we said. That's kind of the goal. They need to do these things. If they do that, they're golden. Well, then how do we know they've done that? That's where we got the goals and the assessment items. And then from that is where we made those lessons. The lessons are kind of all designed to get them to demonstrate through the assessment that they've met those goals, which are ultimately what they need to do to get into med school. A lot of teachers and mentors, if they do this type of mentoring, do it the wrong way, which is, I guess, forwards planning. And they say, oh, I have all this stuff on my computer. I have some like silly lessons. Let me just show these to the students or the mentees, and then we'll kind of figure out the assessment later. You have to do it the other way around, because in this way, everything you do is efficient and effective at getting them to those goals. That's what's called backwards planning. And for us, it's a little bit simpler, but basically the objective comes first, and then as well as the assessment items. Then we collect the resources to meet those goals and the objectives, and then that's how we develop these mentorship sessions. The next piece of the mentoring is leadership, is being an effective executor. And again, we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but using your good judgment to follow through on the plans. And again, using the data is so important. It'll take you like minutes to just briefly look at your mentees, row in that Excel document. And then that'll be a snapshot of what they're good and bad at and what you need to focus on. Again, consistency is important. If you're asking them to be consistent, you have to do it yourself. And again, they understand you're busy, you're a physician. And if you have to, reschedule a meeting or whatever, obviously totally fine. Just communicate with them. Show that you're caring and you actually, are invested in what's going on. But also you have to be demanding. It's especially easy, especially when the mentee is going through a lot of stuff, to kind of give them too much slack. You totally can do that. I understand, like here and there, it's natural, but you have to maintain a demanding, maintain yourself as a demanding mentor, because everyone else in their life is going to be doing that. It's going to be kind of letting things slide or not caring. But you, again, maybe the only one who's setting demanding standards for them. And that's so important. And you want to maximize the time and the resources to get them to work hard towards their goals. So you only have an hour a week at the most. You want to maximize that time together. And if there's something in the lesson where you think, oh, this doesn't really apply, especially to your mentee, don't do it. At least kind of gloss over it and say, okay, this piece is on, volunteering, but it says here that you're already volunteering all over town and all these hospitals. So are you still doing that? You need help with it? No? Okay, great. And then move on. But maximizing the time for everyone involved is very important. Especially in the beginning, you should really critique your own work to make sure you're having an impact. So if your mentee is just not getting it, or you're feeling that, the things you're doing just aren't working, not only from the data, but you should also try to figure it out, as things are going along. If they're just not really getting it, for example, the first lesson's about keeping a schedule, and then the next meeting you meet them and they have no schedule, they missed your meeting, and they've got like 3 assignments that they forgot about or something, that's a sign that, well, they didn't really get the piece you guys discussed on keeping a schedule. So just kind of looking at little things like that are showing what you're doing is or is not working, making sure you're being impactful. And again, as I said, the data is so important for this. And it's really an easy way to quantifiably see if what you're doing is working. Again, we kind of already discussed this, that you mentioned earlier, having a mentee that has a lot of room to grow is an ideal mentor or mentee. We totally agree here at PrIMES, and that's why your mentees are going to be having some of the lowest pre-assessment numbers. That means that they have a lot of things to gain. Some of the questions are about their grades, things like that. They might be struggling. They might almost be failing organic chemistry, for example. So you're going to have to work pretty hard to keep them invested, because they're going to feel super discouraged, and they might even feel more discouraged after you meet with them the first time. You're showing them, oh, they actually have to do all these things, their grades need to be up, all these things. They might get super discouraged, and you might have to really, in some cases, go beyond the traditional role of what you may think a mentor is. We've kind of already beat this into the ground about what a PrIMES mentor is, but that's one reason we kind of capitalize the word mentor in a lot of our emails. You may have noticed that, because a PrIMES mentor is different. Mentor, lowercase, is just kind of, I'm just like your friend kind of, and I hang out with you once in a while and give you advice about life or whatever. But this is a little bit different. So you're kind of going to go above and beyond. Again, you're not going to be working outside of that 1 hour a week commitment. We know you guys are super busy, but again, going above and beyond the ways we've already discussed are kind of something you'll have to do. And do whatever it takes, again, within reasonable bounds, to make sure that they become the best applicant that they possibly can be for themselves. We're going to talk about what are some challenges and strategies. So, excuse me. There's definitely going to be some barriers that you guys come up with, or come up against with your mentees, especially in the beginning. If anything comes up that you feel is kind of outside of your scope or you need questions about, please let us know as soon as possible. Even if you feel like you're jumping the gun, like I'm not on clinical duties, and I'm used to working like 120 hours a week. So I'm basically sitting on my computer, just refreshing my email all day, looking for you guys to like email me and ask me stuff. So please, anything at all, advice, concerns, comments, please let me know about any of these barriers. The first kind you'll run up against are financial ones. So again, this is basically a no-cost program, but the commuting and the time commitments and stuff can incur secondary costs. This is why we've established the virtual mentoring platform. But are there any other strategies you guys can think of to circumventing financial barriers? We like to avoid any situation where they would encounter these. But just about 2 weeks ago, we found out we got a small grant for PrIMES, so we're pretty excited. Something you guys should keep in mind is that we are establishing a mentee kind of hardship fund. So if there's some extenuating circumstance, for example, your mentee literally they can't afford like a transit card to come to one of the group sessions, something like that, and you think it's genuine and legitimate, reach out to the leadership team, and we have funds available for things like that on a case-by-case basis. So please let us know if there's anything that you guys come up against. Ideally, what will happen is you'll kind of establish your relationship as a safe space. It'll take a while. But later on, once they're kind of sharing things about their life with you, if something like that comes up where, a small amount of money where you might even be tempted to say, oh, I'll just buy you a mentor card or something, please don't do that. But reach out to us and let us know, because we do have funds in place for things of that nature. And yes, maybe that will come up after they miss something. Ideally, they'll kind of tell you beforehand, and they're probably going to tell you in private. Just ask them first, say, hey, is it okay if I mention this to the leadership team? They might be able to help you a little bit. Let them know that, of course. But then do so, and we can definitely work with you guys. Again, these, kind of helping with some of these barriers happen early on in the curriculum. Scheduling, again, for the all in-person sessions, they should say, they're encouraged to come to Cornell. They're also super busy. And as you kind of mentioned earlier, if they want to meet at a mutually agreed upon location, a lot of times that's not convenient for either party. So in this case, a lot of times just doing a virtual session is probably the best bet. But again, encourage them to come to Cornell as much as possible is ideal. But if they're repeatedly canceling sessions, not able to meet, please let us know as soon as you can. This is probably the biggest thing, because we did the same thing last year in the mentor training. We begged them to please tell us ahead of time. And then I still got an email like, oh yeah, by the way, I haven't heard of my mentee in 3 months. And it's like, all right, well, now they're 3 months behind and they probably can't make it up. Kind of screwed now. And then we found out that they had been all these things had happened and it got really complicated. So even little things, you will not be bothering me. We've even discussed, maybe not in this cycle, but maybe in cycle 3, having an automatic text messaging service. Just ask you hello, please press 1 if you met with your mentee this week. Press 0 if you do not meet with your mentee this week. That's a little extreme. We may end up doing it anyway, but just please let us know, because we do not want them to fall off. You don't have to do anything. We'll blame it on the data and say the data shows that you haven't been, meeting your responsibilities or whatever. But, we have ways in place of helping reinvest them. Dr. Kamara has been very active in this as well, but kind of nipping it in the bud beforehand is extremely important. We had one mentor actually did this, and their mentee was kind of falling off, and it turned out they had moved, and they didn't have service at somewhere where they were, and so we helped arrange them to facilitate virtual sessions. And then that mentee went on to do excellent and blow it out of the water. And if we had just if that mentor didn't let us know, they would have just kind of kept doing their thing and nothing would have happened, and they would have probably been a non-completer for PrIMES. Whereas a couple other mentors didn't let us know, and then by the time we heard from the mentee, they were long gone. And it's well, it's kind of too late. So please, open lines of communication with the leadership team here. I cannot stress how important this is, because we will take it off your hands and we will deal with it and find a solution. With you obviously involved, we're not going to go over your head and do anything crazy, but we are very invested here, making sure that all the PrIMES mentees, once they're in, we take care of them and we make sure they get everything they need. Kind of already gave this one away too, but mental health barriers. This is, again, something that isn't as common, but it will definitely come up with some of your mentees. In encouraging them to be open with you, they're going to share things, including intimate details of their life. Again, establishing a safe space is very important, more often for the littler things, but they can also share some really big things, and you can totally keep it confidential. However, if there's anything, especially if you feel that they need a professional mental health counselor, if you're worried that they're a risk to themselves or others, the standard things like that you guys have all learned, the alarm reports and alarm symptoms, let us know immediately, obviously, and we will help you guys deal with it, okay? We're not going to go over your heads or undermine your relationship whatsoever, but this is one of those examples where if they tell you something like that, you have to let them know that you're a doctor and you're also their mentor, and that you need to kind of involve other people. We all keep it confidential, and we'll just do the best that we can to help them, and you'll be kind of involved. It's not like you're going to kind of, offload it, and then they're going to feel like you betrayed them or something like that. We'll work together to get them the help that they need, okay? Attitude barriers are another one. So a big one's motivation. They may lack it at various times for a variety of reasons. You got to hold them accountable and give them encouragement and positive feedback. It's so important for that. Even if they've been kind of struggling for a little bit, and then the one thing they do that's great, seize on that and use that, because they're getting lots of negative feedback in their life. So positivity can really help a lot. So speaking of this, what factors do you think can lead to decreased motivation for them? The lack of results is a big one, because some of these things, you might teach them something and it's well, that sounds cool, but when am I going to use this? The emails, for example, how to send the correct, a professional email in the correct fashion. They might not realize that until, in 3 months, when they email somebody and get a great response and get something they needed, so it just takes time, and you have to encourage them to be patient. But those are all very important ways that they may lose motivation. Being cognizant of them and kind of nipping them in the bud are very important. Perseverance. This is a huge one. There's a lot of data actually that says that underrepresented minorities in the sciences are less likely to email or solicit their PI for a letter of recommendation. The reasons cited were that they thought they'd be bothering them. There's actually very good data that supports this. And we also have seen this exact same thing in our own mentees. They'll usually email somebody one time, especially someone that they consider to be an authority. And if they don't hear back, they'll just not email them again because they don't want to be a bother. And they already probably are having some, manifestations of imposter syndrome, things like that. But as we all know, I mean, you have to email people like 10 times to get anything done, obviously. So it's like, they're just not getting what they need because they just don't want to be a bother. It's, it's a much bigger problem that's being realized than anyone really thought. But perseverance is spiraled constantly in the curriculum, you'll see. And this is something that's very difficult for them to really understand. To convince them they're not bothering these people is it blows their mind. They won't even believe you. But you have to keep hitting this one on the head because this will be a barrier that keeps coming up. And then, in 6 months, you're like, okay, what about the research, volunteer position you were going to get? It's like, oh, well, I emailed them twice and they didn't hear back yet. And it's like, it's naturally ingrained. They don't want to bother them. So perseverance is extremely important. Again, with your verbal reinforcement as well as showing them, excuse me, if they're not, for example, filling in their unit survey or their assessment, or they're not doing something you had established they were going to do, you can bug the crap out of them too. And then when you meet with them later, it's like, oh yeah, remember I emailed you 10 times for this? Hopefully you don't have to, but that's what you need to do to, this PI you're trying to get a job with or whatever. Obviously within the bounds of reason, but again, you can use your acumen to kind of teach them that. And especially in the beginning, constant contact and reminders may be necessary, but hopefully by the end, you don't need to do this anymore. And most of our mentees have shown that they, by the end, really, are doing a lot better with that. We've heard from our mentors. And priorities, this is something that, ultimately, they've already expressed that they're extremely interested and invested in going to med school, but they may have, flagging priorities sometimes or changing priorities. If they decide that they want to do like a PhD program or PA school or something, let us know, but that's also okay. We did have one mentee last year that for a while changed his mind and wanted to do a PhD program. We kept him in. By the end, he said he would do an MD PhD program. But again, changing priorities are one thing, like ultimate priorities, but working hard to achieve their goals, those priorities are ones that shouldn't change, and you should really keep investing them in those things. And sharing your own experience may be helpful. I know all of you guys, as have I, have had times when just like it just doesn't seem worth it anymore, or you're just priorities seem to kind of be all not aligned anymore. So sharing how you may have overcome that can be really important. And again, if there's any time, I'll say this one last time, if you feel that it's unsalvageable or insurmountable, there's any problems or anything like that, please let us know. You cannot contact us too much, I promise you. The converse has always been true. So just please, please, please bother us incessantly. Even before something even becomes an issue, if you anticipate it becoming an issue, please let us know. Lastly, there's some family barriers that may come up. Again, we reach out to families and let them know. But if you find that there are family barriers coming up, this is another time where you should just involve us to help navigate the situations. You guys are super busy. We're not going to have you guys, reaching out to these families that you've never met before and things like that. That's like a lot to ask. You can totally be involved, but we have systems and structures in place to help deal with those situations. So you don't really need to do it. This is another big one that is important to talk about. So we are being screened in because of their low readiness scores as mentees. And this, in some cases, are due to life experiences, and those may be foreign to you. So especially if you're from a different background as your mentee. So they might come to you, especially in the beginning, and unload all this stuff, and it's like nothing you've ever experienced or even thought of before. We have a lot of mentees, many of them actually, that are first generation refugees from like war-torn nations and stuff like that. And if you've come from that, that's a fantastic opportunity to share that with your mentee. But most likely you haven't. And that might be something you never even dreamed of even meeting someone that had done that. And now this is a mentee you're trying to, shepherd through this difficult time in their life. So it can be challenging. And again, there's no easy answer for that. Some of those other things we talked about, for establishing credibility will become important. But, showing empathy the same way you do with a patient that might have, a disease or something that you don't have, showing empathy with their situation can really, really help. And they'll understand that. They're going to understand that, okay, like I'm a refugee, but maybe my mentor isn't. They will know that, and that will be okay. You have to be empathetic. And a lot of these challenging life experiences, one thing you'll realize is that these are things the med schools want to hear about. It's part of what's called the distance traveled. And one constant message we'll be telling the mentees is that, when they are interviewing for a position like as in a medical school or in a research lab, they're kind of conditioned to hide those things about themselves. They're going to be thinking, oh, wow, this like really fancy, rich, old white doctor guy is definitely not a refugee. I cannot let him know this about me. They'll actually keep it a secret. When really, it's the opposite of that. They want that. They're, especially in this day and age, someone that's come from that background has a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with their future patient population. And the data shows they're going to be better doctors and solve some of these healthcare disparity crises that we have. And in a lot of our research, when we're making PrIMES, the admissions directors we talked to, we interviewed deans of admissions from a lot of medical schools. They all said the exact same thing. They said that's like a gold mine. If they can find a student who's come that far and had those experiences, like please tell them to share that. That should be the cornerstone of their application. And all of our mentees have said, they've literally told us, I would never share that with anybody. That's like, I don't think they would want to know. That would hurt my candidacy. So if they're sharing these things with you, yes, it can be very challenging and can be a barrier. So first show empathy, but then teach them to use that to their advantage. That may be the thing that gets them into medical school more than anything else. So these type of things are very important. As you noticed on that weird circle diagram, the very outermost pieces were like world and cultural events, for example. And those are things that every med school is looking for. Great. So in closing, remember, backwards planning is, I know it was only a brief piece of what we talked about, but it's very important. It will also help you realize, what the data looks like. And if they're really not getting the scores you want, keeping in mind that you really need to be working towards those goals the whole time. Being relentless. This applies to, bothering them about, keeping up with things, especially in the beginning, and just constantly, trying to make the lessons better, again, within the bounds of what's reasonable. Ask for help, please. I don't understand why a lot of the mentors, not a lot of them, but some of them just didn't reach out more often. We're totally here. Like, this is our job. We're here to help you guys. No problem is too small or concern is not valid. Lead by example. You are the ultimate picture of what they want to be and what they want to do. And so every little thing you do, they're looking at. So you always got to be leading by example. And you guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I promise you this will be a very worthwhile experience for both you and your mentees. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, let me know. You have my email and I think my cell phone. But next steps, we're going to plan the kickoff for a couple, 2 to 3 weeks. I'll let you guys know. And then we'll let you guys go off and running. Thanks again for coming.